And if you can pull that down a little bit further, I like it closer to the front. Because sometimes when they talk, I can't see them because they're really quiet. I have to go forward. Thank you.
I'll be listening sort of this time.
Oh.
Yeah. I think you got it.
And I was with this group with Matt, the previous session. I sat in just to kind of get my feet wet
And
again.
they may be less this time because some of them switched.
Last time was full.
Yeah.
We had a lot, and I was going to mention that to you. That I'm sure I know you know that. You'll probably arrange for it.
The groups are evenly set on
They
Black
kept coming and coming and coming this weekend.
But yeah, that's
like,
the reason
okay,
was because a lot of them had something going on.
Yeah, I think we have 3 PTs and decided they wanted to come or something.
And we don't like to do that too much, but I think that as years go by, more and more things are being scheduled at late times like this. So I don't know if that's
Keep adding more and more. Okay, bye. Okay, everyone, let's get started. The sooner we get started, the sooner we get to home on Astros. What? Yeah. Your umbrella. I'm Dr. Janet Enderly. I'm faculty over at the Clinical Laboratory Sciences Department and School of Health Professions here on campus. And I specifically teach microbiology amongst sundry other things to our students. I do some nurse practitioner teaching. I teach clinical health with Dr. Dashiell and Dr. Patel. I've been doing that for about 4 years now. And our topic tonight is all about international aid. And so we're going to talk as we usually do amongst ourselves, and I'll give you a little information. We'll do a few activities. We probably won't have time for the debate, because I always say every week we'll do a debate at the end and we'll be done with it. Usually we debate anyways whenever we talk about our activities. Some groups are more debate worthy than others. But I was with you guys at your development session with Dr. Dashiell that evening 4 weeks ago. So I remember you were a history major. You were all about the Africanization. You were all good with that. And because he's one of our CLS students. So let's get started. We had a question/assignment from the last time to look at the literature and see if there was anything regarding your profession, or if not in your profession, just any of the healthcare professions that would pertain to international aid. Anybody find something like that you want to talk about? Something we've been doing, other countries have been doing, what maybe needs to be done? We have had, a disaster in our area and then in Puerto Rico, which, reminder, is one of our states in the United States. People tend to overlook that a lot of times. Hopefully I won't get too political on it, so just bring me in if I overreach. Anybody? So have we been pouring aid into Puerto Rico? Oh, you have something good.
So when I was looking into, I was trying to find very specifically OT in international aid settings, and I could not find very much information on that. Like I could not find a single article that fit the criteria specifically. So like I found something with Puerto Rico, but it's like that's not international. That's our own.
Well, that is true.
So, but I think it's very possible that in trying to meet the bigger needs, like trying to feed the hungry and take care of life-threatening diseases and things like that, things like OT that come in after are being overlooked, and the needs of people with disabilities in these countries are definitely being left. Yeah.
So some of our professions may be more involved at certain points than others. Another phase. Somebody talked last week about, she did some research on surgery. So that's something I really hadn't thought about myself. So there's always a need for the Doctors Without Borders and going to, but really countries don't need or ask for surgical type of interventions. So they're wanting, there's always the infectious disease, there's cholera, things going on. But surgery, we really set up to go over and do surgeries. I read about, the cleft palate surgeries or maybe some eye surgeries. There's some dentistry going on. But there are definite gaps in there. And she said she was really looking for, I guess, like surgical rotation or surgical needs in certain countries. And she said there just really was nothing out there. So I thought that was interesting.
My research article for this week was actually about like a comparison of the efficacy of different surgical interventions. I think it was in Uganda, and like the difference between mobile clinics provided, with funding and with support from the government versus like mission trips who go there and provide free care. And it was a comparison to find out, what provided decent care, good follow-up, and like actually improve the circumstances of the people who receive the surgery. And it seemed to suggest that the government-sponsored mobile clinics did a far better job at reducing inequality related to surgical care.
Because they were able to be mobile? Do you think that was that really the reason? Or
I think not just mobile, but the fact that there was a better consistency, like repeated access versus, some sort of critical care coming in and fixing up pallets and leaving. It doesn't really address the real problems.
And then, if we go back to that development piece that we did last month, we talked a lot about trust, colonization, and mistrust. So if it comes from their own government, maybe that's a better setup than somebody coming in from the outside, like you said, kind of helicoptering in, fix something, and then we leave.
Right.
They don't know us. I know Dr. Dasher talks a lot about how many years it's gone. You go into the Dominican and then they go to Guatemala and to establish this rapport with the local people.
I also thought it was kind of an interesting idea to think about how we like to, not be anybody specifically, but everybody who wants to participate in global aid inevitably likes to transpose like whatever their archetype is of like healthcare on wherever they're going, which I think isn't something you can escape. It's just who we are as humans. But that the idea of a global health clinic actually kind of addressed a critical need, which were like infrastructural shortages in terms of surgical availability. And it did it in a way that fit the needs of Uganda versus in a way that was like, oh, we will build a clinic here, people will come to the clinic, because that wasn't necessarily feasible.
So that goes back to that point where you need to find out what they need, not what you think they need, because that's most times very different. And I always think about Christianity as religion and, colonization of the Americas and, you all need to be Christians and we're going to come in. The Catholics, were very, very involved in that. And was that really what did anybody ask them, did you want to be this religion? Is this going to add anything to your life? They already had religion. They had their own religion, So again, it was something that someone else decided for them. That's exactly what you're saying. So that's really, really key no matter what we're doing, but for health care professionals. We're going in and you have to talk to them. Whether you do a study right here, you're trying to help improve Galveston County, or you're just going to walk in and say, well, I think you need this. And this is what I want to do. It's been my dream, and I want to fix this, this, and this. And I have health fairs, like a community clinic for pediatrics or whatever it is. No. I think St. Vincent's works so well because it serves a need that the community is really looking for. It's patient care. In the old days, UTMB was an indigent hospital, whatever you want to call it, so people could come here. I know when I started as a student, I was poor like everybody else, all the students, and so I didn't have insurance and all that, so I went in, I filled out the paperwork. Guess what? I got free health care. I think they said, you need to pay $50 for this whole thing of services I was going to get, a procedure and all this. So it was based on my income. That was fabulous, but they had to stop doing all that because, we were in the red all the time, and now we don't provide that kind of care. So it's really a hit on our community. So St. Vincent's tries to plug up some of that, where they can just show up and receive care. If it's anything that's more involved, then they're going to have to be referred, and then I guess it goes through the system that way. But at least they can get started. I've got a friend who went through a cancer diagnosis and a melanoma, and he was asking me about it. I said, I don't have anything, and I barely work, and what should I do? I said, go to St. Vincent's, and through St. Vincent's, they got him started. They got him to an oncologist, who got him the treatment, the medication, all that stuff, and he's fine. He's great. They did surgery. So at least it's somewhere for them to start, and they feel like it's safe, you know? It's not like I have to go in and do a bunch of stuff and people are going to turn me down, which is what they're used to, I think, a lot of times. So when we talk about development, why does that matter to you in healthcare? I think you've already spoken to that. So what you're going to be able to go out there and do is going to depend on where they are in terms of development, infrastructure, stable government, all of that. Are you going to be able to go in and do that? I know Carolyn Utzi over in School of Health Professions with PT, she does some work in several countries with prosthetics and wheelchairs. So, you know, if somebody donates a bunch of wheelchairs, are you going to be able to get them over there? That costs money. Who's going to donate the money? How are we going to logistically get them over there? Yes, we have all these PTs and these PT students in this organization, and we're going to go over and we're going to set these people up in wheelchairs. And how are we going to really make all that happen? So it just depends on the country where you're going. Are they ready to receive something like that? Can you fly an airplane in there? Are you going to be able to get a truck? So there's logistics involved. That's development. Any comments from all of you about that? Okay. Let's talk a little bit about international aid and what that really means. And we'll get into more of the complexities of it. What do people think about aid? What do you think about international aid? Should we as a country? Should we not? Are we doing enough? Should we do more? Historically, that goes a little bit back to that colonization and when financial aid, I'm thinking of a student, international aid started and why. And then we'll do a famine case study that has to do with Fernando as he's grown up a little bit. And if we have time, the debate. We'll see. Here's Fernando. He's now 2 years old. Isn't he cute? He is still in Children, Texaco, and he's got a new little baby sister named Elena. His dad is a wage laborer doing construction, and his mom is a housekeeper in the better part of town. And they are fortunate in that they have a grandmother who's able to take care of the 2 kids during the day. So that's where we are with Fernando. All right, there's a famine in Children, Texaco. A lot of people have been affected, and that's what we're going to do our activity later on. Like, what do you think about that, and how can you affect that? Who's involved? Who benefits? All that. If, say, just for the sake of argument, we're the United States, what do you think they need for this famine? There have been other famines in other countries. So, in case of Fernando's community, how can our government help them? Anybody? What's causing the famine? Drought. Just drought. I'm from Central Texas, and we've had a 12-year drought. Doesn't affect me like it does Fernando's family, because I can still go to H-E-B and get groceries, right? So, but you know, they don't really have that kind of setup. So if people are starving to death, what should we do about that? What did we decide everybody needed for food, water, shelter? You know, then we went off into human rights and sort of, we wanted Fernando to grow up and go to school and those kinds of things. But for today, what does he need? He needs food. So we would probably want to do something short term, and then, like you were saying, long term. Like, what's causing this? How can we help in the long term? For what is the government doing? Are they corrupt? Are they a good government? Are they taking the food? Yeah, we really don't know yet, but we'll talk about that. So we're saying we might need to give some international aid in this scenario. So the definition is voluntary transfer of resources. So not just food, could be money, so that they can buy food, if there is food, from one country to another, given at least partly with the objective of benefiting that recipient country. So we want to benefit them, and we'll talk a little bit about the benefits to that donor country too. Why do we do why do we give aid? So there are a couple of kinds. We talked about the short term. That would be humanitarian aid. In the case of a crisis, a natural disaster, a war, man-made disaster. When people are in very dire straits and they're not going to be able to go on, they're dying by the tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands over time. So you want to do something that's emergent, rapid. You want to deliver something that would assist them with the food, water, shelter situation. You want to save lives, and then later on, those NGOs, the non-governmental organizations could come in and create some sort of a different plan. So we've been through Katrina. I went through Ike here on the island. Now we've had Harvey. There's Maria and Irma. So after something like that, the wildfires in California, earthquakes, any of that kind of thing, there's Haiti. You're going to have issues with food, water, shelter, and then with that comes disease and death. Okay, that's the humanitarian part. Development aid is the one that is more long-term. So you're going to go in and fix the root of the problem, not just put a Band-Aid on it, but you're going to try to get to the meat of it. So you want to address maybe why there's so much poverty. There's lack of economic equality or health care equality. You want to help that country achieve long-term goals. And again, this is going to depend on your relationship with that country and their desire to accept that kind of help. You want to look at things that are going to address maybe education in the long run, or wells for water, crops, so help them with agriculture. And it's not that we want to go in and just dump a bunch of stuff on them and say, here you go, this is great, wonderful, this is what you need. Again, it's what they feel they need. And it's also teaching them how to move forward. Because once we leave, they're the ones that are going to have to carry on. In the case of something like technical assistance, which would be maybe doctors, nurses, other healthcare professionals. For me, as a clinical lab scientist, there are groups associated with my profession that go in and help laboratories in different countries, right? Especially Africa. So there's PEPFAR, that deals with the HIV issue. And so we don't want to just go in and buy a bunch of instrumentation and leave it there for them, because I don't know, what if they don't have electricity all the time? And it goes off and on. What if they don't have a place to store reagents that are going to go bad? What if the people who are working there leave and they don't still come to work, so they have high turnover? We need to teach them how to be competent and take care of the people in their country after they leave. So it's to teach a man to fish and not just give him the fish analogy. You mentioned something really important when you talked about the looking at the which of the methods worked for the surgery in Uganda. So they were able to measure some outcomes. How do we know if these long-term fixes are going to work or not? How can we assess that? We're scientists, so we want to get a baseline, and we want to be in, and we want to see if we made a difference, right? So that's going to take a long time to measure. How do we even know that what we're doing is working well? We can kind of see that if we're delivering food and people stop dying, and if there are cases of cholera, you can monitor that, and by the week, by the month, quarter, whatever, if the number of people getting sick drops and the people that die is less and less, then yes, you're having an effect. Whatever you're doing is working. But it's a little bit different when you go to build a water well or put in toilets for better sanitation. And are they going to use it? Is it going to still be there? All those kinds of things. All right, so the kinds of aid, I mentioned technical assistance, but also food aid, which we talked about. It could be the food, the ability to grow food, the cash to purchase food, because there are markets and things. So it can be between two countries, just one-on-one. It could be a multilateral between multi-countries. That would be like the World Bank, so sort of like an umbrella, and then underneath that, then they would donate to or give to a particular country. And then there could be tide aid. Any idea what tide aid means? Kind of what it sounds like, tide aid. So if I'm going to give Taiwan tide aid, what does that look like? There's some condition put on that. I want you to spend it on something that I say you should spend it on, or I want to get something back, right? So I'm making some sort of putting some sort of a limitation on that. So it's sort of a quid pro quo. A project or a program. So, I mean, you can imagine what that might be. School, I don't know, some type of new agriculture where you help them to grow a new crop. It could be GMO, I guess, something that's so that they need, that they have a need for a certain vitamin that they're not getting in their diet. People are dying of that. You can introduce a new crop that provides that. That would be some sort of project or program. And this shows you which sectors are giving aid in which parts of that. So if you kind of look at the public sector, is that purple kind of on the left, and then the NGOs are the light blue. There's public, private, multilateral that are earmarked. That'd be the tide aid. So they're saying what you can spend this on. But that's not to say that they have to do that, right? I guess I could cut off my next payment if you're not doing what we agreed to. But there's a lot of gray when you talk about aid. There could be these multilateral organizations that are really core organizations. So they're there for a specific purpose. So just looking at a few of these and where they put their money, where they donate. So the public sector a lot of times will donate to infrastructure and other, which is, I guess, not classifiable. Debt relief, that's a big one. So that's money. So we're going to give money a lot of times through the public sector. For your NGOs, in the light blue, looks like the most is humanitarian, so that's the short term. Those are those short-term fixes, when there's been a disaster and there's need for food or water or shelter. The earmarked is in red. That's really big for humanitarian. So if I give my money to Brazil, I'm going to say I want it to go just to this one thing and nothing else. So I guess to me that smacks of kind of control. I want to tell you still what I want you to use my money for. Or if I have the feeling that your country is not exactly on the up and up, and maybe your government is siphoning off money and not using it for the people, then I want to try to make sure that the right people are going to get this money. Any questions about that? Comments?
I think at least for America, if they're giving money to another country, it's a little bit more regulated because American people are saying we're able to take that money, and politicians have to increase it. They have to make money.
So you're saying that you as a citizen or our government
So
feel?
So if we're giving money to another country, I can only imagine that it's earmarked largely because the politician has to kind of make it earmarked and to kind of make it say to his constituents.
So he's accountable.
Yeah. So I can only imagine that he's trying to also make everybody happy.
He's working both sides.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, well, let's do this.
Okay, that's a good point. So let's talk for a few minutes about why we would want to help another country.
A rising tide floats all ships.
What?
A rising tide floats all ships.
Say it one more time.
A rising tide floats all ships. The idea that
Oh, okay.
another country doing well would actually cause us to do better. Stability around the world.
Right, stability. And that's going to come back to us.
Yeah, a virtuous cycle.
Okay, so you said virtuous.
A virtuous cycle, a cycle that's self-propagating.
Okay.
Is good and also will somehow improve our lot as well.
Okay, so can somebody expand on the virtuous comment? And another little bit kind of seg off of that. Why do you want to help somebody?
Allies.
Allies. That's why you help your friends? I'll take you out to dinner. You help me with these notes. Allies, that's huge, right? So you're talking militaristically?
Or economically.
Economically. So what do we get economically? How do we benefit that way if we're donating?
Tourism.
What?
Like tourism or something like that.
Tourism?
Higher GDP, they can buy more market.
Okay, good.
That used to be true, we don't really get it.
GDP goes up for us. What about plain old resources? They have something that we like, we want. In the old days, it was, could be gold, metals, oil,
Isn't that just mercantilism though?
Sure. Yeah. But I think it's a large motivator.
Yeah, definitely.
Wars have been started for no less. Any other reasons? You're missing one big one. How about the goodness of my heart? No. How about altruism? But I mean, a government, just in general. You don't break it down to the senator. Those guys, anyways. Yeah, we don't need to talk about them. So altruism, because it makes us feel good. Think about a religious organization. A church. Why do they do things? Why do they build schools and go over there and build a church and they help clinics and do these mission trips and all?
Probably need their religion.
Okay.
Not that that's bad, but.
So if I work with a lady and she goes to Haiti every year. She's been doing it for many, many years. It's a big deal. They take medical supplies and they do all this stuff when they go over there. And this is really important to her because she's, really active in her church, and this really makes her feel good as a person. Maybe our governments don't feel good. They don't have feelings, really. But, it makes her feel good. So, any other points that we might have missed?
I think intellectual.
Int-
Like space.
Okay, science. And knowledge. Tell your students about knowledge. Okay, that's really good. Oh,
One more. This is maybe kind of a religious idea, but just the idea that we are no different from other human beings, and so we have no more right to a life with sustainability in it than they do, and so we have a responsibility to take care of each other like people in a family have a
moral
responsibility.
obligation.
Yeah.
So you can see that it just kind of depends who it is we're talking about. So we all know, we've had people in power in our country. We went in and toppled the government a few years back, and it was said because, we were retaliating against the 9/11 devastation that was done to us, and oh, by the way, they have a lot of oil there. Or it was because, they kind of sort of a revenge thing for a previous president's actions or inactions. So people in power, like our president or our Congress, they can have really selfish motivations for either giving aid or keeping aid away. And it's a bargaining tool. So it's definitely something that you can hold over people's heads, because some of these countries have been receiving aid for decades. and continue to receive aid, and they are dependent upon it, whether you agree with that or not. And we look at some people who talk about that later on in some videos that, do we create sort of a monster that, the dependency thing or the interdependency is something that's very hard to break, and how do we step away from that? Anything else? Y'all came up with some really good ones. Okay. Okay, we're going to do some poll everywhere. One person at each table. Pull out their phone and, oh, let me unlock it. Hold on. I have to show you my information. There it is. Okay, if you can text to mine, text to 2233, text my name in 354. Do that. And you talk at your tables and let me know when you're all done, and then I'll get the answer. So the first question is, which country gave the most aid by percent GNI in 2015? Anybody can explain GNI? Percent GNI? You said GDP. Close. So GDP is what we make here in the country. Some of us may have a corporation in Mexico where we produce, clothing or shoes or cars or something. That's still money that comes into our country because I'm a U.S. citizen. So we have to put that in the equation too. And we have how many people here, right? So many people, citizens in our country, and we make so much money. If we have debt, that has to be taken off. So it's sort of a net income. It's not a gross like GDP, but it's the national income, gross national income. So there are some pluses and minuses that go into that. And what this means when we compare percent GNI between countries, it's sort of a normalizing equation. So some students like to say, well, say Sweden, for instance, they don't have very many people, so they have a higher GNI than we do. No, the percent GNI is standardization across, makes the playing field very level. So just kind of keep that in mind. So between these four countries, the United States is one of them. Which one do you think gave the most aid by what their national income is? What percent? So, and we'll talk about the percent of national GNI that you think we give. That'll be coming. So first, which country gives the most?
I hear you.
It sounds really obvious, but oh well.
All done? Yes? Ready? Oh, somebody changed it. So 3 of the tables, it looks like think Canada. And then 1 goes for the U.S. Oh, I have to do this. Sweden.
Oh, yeah.
You got it? Okay. We'll talk about this a little more in depth. All right, let's go to the next one. So it wasn't the United States. So which country do you think received the most U.S.? Oh, darn, I'm sorry. I shouldn't talk and try to do that. Okay. Well, let's think about it and pretend we don't know the answer. You'll all get one. So this is economic and military assistance. So it's definitely Afghanistan, right? And that usually trips people up because you don't think about military assistance as being aid. We like to buy countries weapons and tanks and all that kind of thing so that they'll do what we want them to do. Okay, Afghanistan. All right. No difference between the amount of aid promised and what is actually received by that other country. True, false? Is this a contract? It might be. I mean, what's going to happen if we don't make good on what we promised? And that happens all the time. What are they going to do? They're a poor country, right? So everybody's through? Okay. You are correct. False. All right. This is the kicker here. What % of the U.S. budget is spent on foreign aid?
I think it's less than 1%.
Okay. Last group. Oh. All right. Less than 1%. Okay. That's kind of shocking. So.
Does that include military?
I don't know if it does or not. It doesn't say that, but I don't know. I can't say.
And on top of that, on my recent issue of the JAMA, they said that I guess their goal is to cut that by 30% this year for the next budget, 2018 budget.
For international aid.
For international aid. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So let's talk about what less than 1% means to us. Let me see if I can find that number. So what it means is that in the United States as a whole, we spend that amount of money right there. I'm trying to find the number. 300 million, billion, 300. I'm good with numbers. I'll find it. On pet care a year. Okay? Every year. As a nation, that's what we spend. The same amount. We also spend that amount of money on lawn maintenance. Lawn maintenance. That's not a whole lot. And if you ask most people on the street what they think we give, they say like 30%, and that and it should be less. They think we spend 30%, and they think we should only spend 13%. We spend $30 billion annually on foreign aid.
I was just going to ask, is the less than 1% the U.S. government budget, or is it everybody?
No, that's of the budget.
Okay, yeah.
That's
Because I know like governments like Sweden are much more regulated by the national government, so that could be why their percentage is much higher.
okay. And we're going to look at percent GNI here in a minute and compare Sweden, Norway, all the other countries.
Wait, sorry, I don't understand your, what do you mean? Can you just explain what you were saying?
Yeah. So like, so here, like we have the federal government, we also have the states, and then like individuals give a lot to international aid, just to different organizations.
You're talking about public,
Right.
from the public sector, or for NGOs.
Yeah.
But,
And
but
so
government, comparing government to government.
Yeah.
Is what this is saying.
Right. So I was just saying that it's just speculating that maybe Sweden gives more through the government and less through the public sector, but I don't know. I was just guessing.
Okay, yeah, I'm sorry, I was just trying to understand
Yeah,
what you were talking
yeah.
about.
All right. So that is the end of that. And so let's see, who got the most right? You all got Afghanistan.
All in Canada.
Okay, it's the last session. It is. Up in. All right, now sit around. Dr. Patel will say, oh, my candies. Okay, this particular this graph shows what I think you were kind of commenting on a little bit, but maybe not completely. So if you look at this is the percent of the GNI that we talked about just a few minutes back. This is in 2013. A few years ago, over several different kinds of meetings, the UN and different councils, they decided that there should be a target. Every country in the world should give about 0.7% of their particular GNI. So whatever your GNI is, you should give 0.7%. Well, look where Norway and Sweden are. They're over 1%. So they're above the target. So are Denmark, the UK, Netherlands, and Sweden and Norway usually flip 1 and 2, every few years. And we happen to be down there, 0.19. And the average, if you average all of this, we're at around 0.4. So we're still 0.3 below what the target was supposed to be. So there's a gap. That's the point of that. So this just talks a little bit about these countries and when they began talking about what these targets should be. We should be giving more and more and more through the governments. And these international aid and development conferences set this target, but it has not been reached, obviously. And that's, again, the same slide where it shows the agreed target and then the countries down below. So where does this money go? That's what's kind of interesting. Who gets the money? Is it really the very most needy? Or are there some countries out there who you and I might think of as being donors and they're receiving because of these things here? Okay, so start with these low to middle income countries, 31%. Not bad, so about a third. Low income countries, 2%. So this would be less than this. So moving up. Here's some upper middle income countries are also receiving some money from foreign countries. You have some that are these developing countries and territories, but they're more advanced. So again, we're sort of moving up on the grid. And then over here on this part of the pie, unallocated by income. So in that group of almost a quarter of the aid that's being received would be a country like Israel. Do we think in general that Israel is someone who is in need of money? No, I wouldn't. But then again, maybe they need some things and we need some things from them. It's all about alliances and all that. The least developed countries, and that's not in terms of income, but development. So 25% goes there. What would you say if I said, just for sake of argument, I said, you know what, we shouldn't be giving to any of those countries that make above a certain amount of percent GNI or certain income, or they have this much development. We should give to all of those most needy countries. Why would you argue that?
For it or against?
I say give to the needy. Against.
I'm against.
Yeah.
Say that issues of development are multifactorial, and therefore you cannot rely on something as simple as GDP or whatever metric we're using as a method of allocating resources. It's too simplistic.
Okay, that's true. If you're driving down the seawall and you see a guy with a sign, I'm homeless, I'm a veteran, please help me. Are you likely to give money to him or to maybe the church that you go to? I don't know. It's not right or wrong. The church, somebody that you know. Why? Because you feel like there's more chance of your church putting it to good use, managing that money, and it getting to the people who really need it versus, I don't know, this guy, he might be panhandling, he might just be gonna go get a beer at the corner or something if I give him a 5, and I'm not gonna throw good money after bad. So think about these governments. If they are unstable, they're corrupt, they can't ever get their stuff together, should we be throwing money at them? No, probably, pretty much assuming that it's not going to really help the people, it's not going to get to the people who need it, those really, really, really needy people, or we're going to go where we think it might do some actual good. I do that when I donate to charities. I do my, what's that called, SECC, that contribution, through UTMB or whatever, state contributions, we just did it. And there's this whole laundry list, you pull down the tab, and all these organizations, charitable organizations. Oh my gosh, what have I read lately? Red Cross thing, I got some bad publicity. I don't know if I want to go there. There's that thing about the Girl Scouts and how they're so top heavy with all their administrative costs that really, a very small percentage actually goes to the Girl Scouts. So, they're off my list. So I do all of that. I rationalize, and just in things that I've read or I've heard, and it, it may not be very scientific, but I go with my gut. I'm likely to go to, Libby's Place. I donate to them. It's a senior daycare center next to Moody Methodist. So it's local. I had an aged mother who lived with me. That's important to me. Or the women's shelter here in Galveston. I feel like if I do it locally, then it's going to get to those people who really need it. Whether or not that's true, I have no idea. But I'm making assumptions that my money will be put to good use. So that's kind of what's behind that. Plus, I don't know, maybe I want to be on the board of directors at Libby's Place one year or something, and I want to enhance my CV. So, maybe it's something in it for me. All right, so let's look at the difference between, we talked about promised and actual. So official aid given over a long period of time, about 23 years. And the very top is what's promised, that purple line at the top. So you can see the promises have been increasing really nicely. We're up to about 0.5%, a half of 1%. And that's in billions of dollars, US dollars. Down here, the actual aid is down around 0.2%. So there's a huge gap in between. So down here, I think this is probably the most telling. This is the money given to the poorest nations. It's almost a flat line. And then the percent of GNI is listed over there on the right. So that sort of tells you that there have been more promises made and really not much progress in people receiving it who need it. And again, that's multifactorial. There are legitimate reasons why it's not going there. But, maybe it's fixable. I don't know. So again, here's your promised, or what's been given and what's been needed. So remember, the UN and all those conferences, summits said they should be at that 0.7% target. So aid that's been given since 1970 has been about $3.5 trillion, and there's been a shortfall since that same period of time of $5 trillion. So more of a need still than there has actually been given. So it's kind of flipped. Okay, any comments on that before we move into a little bit about history? Just a little bit.
I just had a brief question on because I completely agree with your point that a lot of governments, especially for the poorest countries, are corrupt. And I've worked very closely with Haiti for a while now, and can private organizations, so NGOs, can they receive federal funding? Because the organization that I work with works very closely with the Haitian government, but the Haitian government is very corrupt. But that organization, I believe, receives federal funding for some projects.
Yes, that's true.
So can that kind of...
So they're kind of bypassing
Right.
the corrupt government.
Right.
They found a way. Yeah, sure. So there's that public-private sector. And a lot of times, it's not out of the U.S. budget, for this year. It's through a combination of public donations or even governmental donations that are then routed through privately.
Right. Is that included within I'm assuming, within within that breakdown of government funds that are
Yes,
for
yes, yes,
So, okay,
yes, that's part of that percentage and those numbers.
okay.
It would be that part.
So it's not just going directly to the government and
No.
all of that. Okay.
So if we build on what Dr. Dashiell talked about last month, about the colonization and all of that, World War II happened, and there was financial assistance, international aid sort of came to the front. So this has not been around forever. Because what happened in World War II? Maybe not on our soil, but over there. Everything was destroyed. So I guess, I mean, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me, but I guess if, I bomb it, then I'm going to go fix it. But there's people, and you've won, and now you have everything is in rubble, and you've got to go over there and help these people that don't have anywhere to live or to go to school or go to work or anything. So let's rebuild them because, I don't know, we were allies with Russia at that point, Soviet Union, during World War II. And then what happened, like in Germany, between us and the Soviet Union, and who's going to get Germany? Because you know what, we defeated them, and now that soil is up for grabs, that country, and it might be strategically located, So we had East and West Berlin, right? So all I'm saying is that there was a moral obligation, I guess, and some politically generated motivators also that encouraged and I guess provided the impetus for international aid to have its beginnings after World War II. So now we have to go in and fix. Contrary, I guess, or a little different than what is done now with international aid and how it's kind of ongoing. President Truman had a .4 program where he wanted to assist poor countries. Okay, that's great. But it was finite. I think that's sort of one of the key points that's missing in terms of present day international aid, wherein both Truman and with the Marshall Plan, those things said, okay, in 5 years we're going to do this, this, and this, and then we're done. We're going to move on. So there was an end in sight, and we just didn't continue to pour in more money, and these countries become more and more dependent. And so, especially when we talk about Africa, there's a lot of controversy about continuing international aid, and even by some of their own country people. Kennedy also was one of those that said it was going to be this era of development. We're going to take care of all these problems of the world. So he declared that in a decade, it's all going to be great and wonderful. That didn't quite happen. But Truman had a quote that this would be a bold new program for making the benefits of scientific advances, knowledge, we talked about that knowledge, and industrial progress available for the improvement and growth of underdeveloped areas. It sounds very, altruistic, I guess. But if you break that down, what about that industrial progress? That could maybe benefit us. So if we're taking our industry over there to another country, that's sort of that tied aid thing. So if I bring this over, then you're going to have a plant or a factory over there with my new invention, and you can employ your own people, but I'm going to be getting some of the kickback from that. Or maybe in the case of China, a lot of times, China is one of those countries that historically has given aid in that they would bring in, some market system, and bring their own people to work on it, And so that doesn't really help that country much, because that money is only coming back into China. And it's not really helping those people that live there. So this is where it started, so 50, 60 years ago. This is an image of the world, a map, about who gives aid, and actually this is food. This is just food, it's not money. And the point of this is that typically we tend to sort of do a divide, draw a line across here, and we divide it between north and south. It's not to say that it's strict lines, and so there could be a country in the south that is enlarged or inflated, but generally the north gives to the south. That's just kind of how it's worked. There are starting to be some changes to that and some exceptions to that rule. I know that India, for one, used to be a recipient, was always a recipient, and now they are being asked to be a donor. Because as nations improve their situation, then they are being called on by the world community to assist with others. Brazil is another one. They used to be a recipient, and now they're being asked to donate. So things can change. It is ever fluctuating. But in general, we want to say, the North gives more food than the South would give, vice versa. So we've already touched a little bit about these types of organizations. So outside of the government, there can be the NGOs, the non-governmental organizations, the public-private. There's something called ODA, which is the Overseas Development Assistance. That's government. ODA is government. World Bank is one of those that could be involved in a lot of the aid decisions. And then there's things like the European Union that also can be involved. So I always think about the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So that's, more of a public-private partnership, I would say. Because for healthcare, they are just everywhere and all this money. Coca-Cola is one that surprised me when I started teaching this. So they are involved in Africa and helping to not only educate orphans of HIV victims, but also to help them become sustainable economically. So they have created vendor systems for them where they can have small businesses and go out and support themselves as they grow and develop. And so they're really a leader, I think, in all but one of the countries in Africa. They are an outstanding provider of these kinds of programs. All right, Fernando. So this is what Children Texaco looks like. As you can see, the land is just parched dry. We only have 4 tables. Okay. So we have this scenario where the UN has issued a warning of famine in the northern part of Children Texaco, and it's because of the drought during a typically rainy season. So if you want to go global warming, whatever reason you want to say, we won't debate over that, I guess. So the economy is based on subsistence farming, wage labor, as you can imagine, and livestock. As the famine progresses, it's estimated that 1 million people have been affected, with almost 700,000 already dying. As the region is home to the current president, the government attempted to provide food rations to those affected, but they ran out after 3 days. The World Food Program has pledged to deliver $4 million in food aid to the region, with an additional $3 million committed by a variety of bilateral and multilateral international donors. The U.S. has committed $5 million. With this scale of devastation, images of starving children surface in the international media. So you know what happens then. All the celebrities come out. Get on late night TV. Soon there's an outpouring of public support for the famine victims. With these endorsements, then another $1 million has been raised from individuals, charitable organizations like faith-based ones, and relief NGOs. But what happens in Fernando's little community is that his mom loses her job. His dad has to move to the south to go to work because he's lost his living, and the kids don't have enough to eat. They are down to only 1 meal a day, and the initial government rations that might have been available for them for those 3 days have been confined to supporters of the president only. So only a trickle of the international food aid is actually making it into Fernando's community and onto their table. Reports of corrupt politicians diverting aid circulate in the media. Many of the food items that have been donated are being sold in the local market at 10 times the cost. So this is the situation, and it's not atypical. So there's a lot of things that have sort of happened downstream of a drought, now famine, and now it's affected Fernando and Elena. So you each will have a question that you can talk about at your table. and then share with the rest of us.
Oh, it is for yeah, nice. Yeah. Well, if you don't need it, I'll finish.
Alright, see what you think.
Oh, I'm sorry, yes. Oh, right now.
Oh, that's true.
You ran. Oh, you gonna go on a
It's tough.
Organization.
Solve problems.
They have resources and they are like,
makes sense.
It's still big.
That's the people that don't make money.
Like free. I think I missed that. I mean, yeah, I can argue shop. Or yeah.
But if they have like,
Or if you're
they just try not.
that makes sense. It makes us buy the country. Yeah, it was real hot and then it was real cold.
They're showing the money that they're using. It's not like it makes sense, right? Yeah, by signals to others.
Make you giant balloons.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do have like super rich right here. I think it was no reason I should cover this. Remember, I used to be my dad and we went to take our ski for really much years. And I'm like, like, oh my god, yeah, it sounds awesome. He did. My dad. Yeah, he's dating my girlfriend.
After undergrad.
Like how many
There's nothing to it.
Oh, I don't think
Well, I think more like
if we don't have access to the middle.
yeah, I would be
Like, I started
What do you mean like?
it's but not sure.
Yeah, you can also do it, but you argue money for
Okay.
Yeah. Sometimes I don't.
Let's talk about what you decided is going on here with the famine. You have one? Now, question number one.
Oh,
Could you read it to us and tell us what your group thinks about this?
Yes, who are the victims of the famine in our sickness?
Children in Mexico. Say a lot to get it.
Think about where they live and work. What kind of social support do they have? What kind of resources do they have, if any? What might their financial situation be like, and why can't they get?
Who are the victims here?
So we talked about like it's the people who are already living in the poor towns, especially the ones that aren't supporters of the government, the president. So they saw their beliefs, they're not getting access.
Yeah, you also mentioned people who don't have the necessary skills to be able to transition to another job. They might have a job at Penn State, but now they can't get another job because there's something's lacking there.
So it's the poor people.
Yeah.
So they don't have any resources, they don't have any opportunities. Anybody else that's going to be affected here?
Yeah, I mean, it's not, it says who are the victims of the famine, but this doesn't exactly answer that question, but I'd say that the donators are kind of victims victims in a way because they're victims of deceit because they're giving their money over to a country and then the government is rationing it out the way that they might on it. It's not what they had in mind.
Right.
So
Okay, yeah, I like that. Anything else that you want to add to that? What?
Political enemies.
Political enemies are going to be threatened, you said?
They're going to be victims of the famine
Oh, victims.
Political enemies of the
of
president.
the president.
Oh, okay, sure, yeah.
Yeah.
But what if there are neighboring countries? Could they be a victim in a way? And why? How could they trade? If they trade, right. It could affect their economy. These people are leaving. What if they go across the border? So all of a sudden they have refugees in their country.
I think they probably are.
I mean, it's like with Haiti and the DR, a bunch of Haitians are going over to
Sure.
DR as refugees.
True. So, yeah, and that was an extra burden and strain on the neighboring country's government and the people there and their resources. So they are victims also. Donating countries, Fernando,
Big sister.
because, we were all into, how are these little ones going to develop? What do they need to be successful in life? So this is a good help them out. All right, who are the beneficiaries? Does somebody have that question? Did you have that? Anybody have that one? Okay, I have that one. So we didn't have 7 tables tonight. Who are the beneficiaries of famine? Who gains? Who are the winners?
Rich.
The rich, the entitled. Those people who are entitled, who are politically, aligned with the president, or they have the money. So the scenario said that there is some food that's coming in, or being provided, somehow produced, and it's going into the markets, but there's a high cost. So who's benefiting there? The vendors, the people who are selling it, some black market prices. So they're going to be making money off of this situation. What else would have happened to the families in this area? Part of the economy is based on livestock. So what do? You don't have money to buy food. I don't have a pawn shop or anything. So they're going to sell off what they have. So, if they have to sell their goat and their chickens, whatever that is. Somebody said last week, oh, but they're already dead because it's a famine. Maybe, especially if it's a large animal, but still, you probably would protect that at all costs because that's the way you're going to make your money in the future. And all of a sudden, you cut that off, and you have no good outlook, nothing coming your way because it's not there anymore. You don't have eggs to eat, you don't have chicken, you can't grow any corn, all it's a cycle. Who else is going to benefit? What if I'm a neighboring country and I don't know, I always wanted to have their land? I might go over there and take them over. The president's going to benefit unless, there's like a revolution or something and people revolt against his government and they can go in and try to take over. So there could be some benefit of another political party in the country. You can take advantage of this. Anytime there's instability, rise to the surface and seize that opportunity. Anything else we can think of? Number 3 question. Do we have number 3? I think that's the last one. Yeah. If we were to devise risk factors for famine, what would they be and what are the necessary conditions? So risk factors for famine.
Monoculture.
What?
Monoculture. Relying on one specific crop over all others, and then if something happens and that was devastated, then you're out.
Disease.
Environmental uncertainty. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's true. It's absolutely true.
natural disasters, which we don't have any control over. The unstable government again, because we're going to talk a little bit about what would happen here in the United States. And that's the same scenario. How would we address that? So, do they have the means really to tackle this problem? Probably not. Do they not want to? Number 4. Okay, you two.
So you want to do something to help but are wary of the degree of corruption and high rates of engaged diversion. What could you do as an individual, as part of an organization, and as a citizen of your nation? So you came up with, if you're part of an organization, and let's say it's an NGO organization, I think like what she was describing in Haiti, bypass the corrupt government and directly to the people, work with contacts on the ground, religious organizations, who actually benefit or work for the people, instead of
Find a way in some little niche and don't go to the top.
exactly.
Stay away from that.
And individual, the individual can try to look up organizations that are bypassing the government, NGOs, and maybe donate directly to them.
Yes, like I was talking about. You can find a way to do that.
And then citizen of the nation, you could lobby your government to either do the tithe spending to make sure that whatever aid is given to that country is spent on a specific thing, and hold them accountable that it's not being spent somewhere else. Or the government can donate directly to an NGO that's going around the country.
Any other thoughts on that? Nobody says you're going to helicopter food in and drop it and all that kind of stuff. We had a great one last week, drums, which I kind of liked because drums can do a lot of stuff, right? So, maybe drones could get around. I don't know, maybe the military could shoot them down. But, technology, I guess, is a big deal now.
I know sometimes,
I was just going to say, this is the same situation like in the 1990s. Like,
Oh, sure.
I guess
So, if you think about, okay, you working with your NGO, and your contact over there, got this food delivered, it's in the trunk, and you're driving to the village. What happens when the soldiers come? Or the bandits, whoever they are. And they say, we're going to take this trunk. Yeah, no shooting can happen. So that's a problem.
even just getting as an organization, getting into the country, you have to get by the government. You can't just go to a country and start this organization, no matter how well intended. There always has to be a reason. I know people who have gone for that purpose and they have been kicked out by the government because they're like, what are you doing here? What are you bringing to us?
Very distrustful.
Right. And so that would be an obstacle if the government's already corrupt, so corrupt in the first place, just having to get past that.
Yeah, so that reminds me of this piece that is, I'm just bring that up. I was reading through all of Dr. Patel's notes here. About the relationship between the donors and the recipients. So it sort of speaks to your topic here. So it's sort of a distant relationship. It's not like you know that person over there is going to help you. There's this complicated hierarchy that exists between the taxpayers of our country, our citizens, and actually getting it back into another country where we want it to go, and through the government on down. Most of the aid programs have to, I guess, manipulate a chain of relationships that starts with you, the taxpayers, so you're going to delegate where that money is going to go to your elected officials, your Congress, who then they become principals that delegate authority to a new set of agents, the heads of the aid agencies. So we're all the way to the aid. And then that goes to those employees, contractors, consultants that are going to be in charge of carrying out the mission of getting the shipment there. And in the recipient country, we've got this hierarchy all over again. So you've got all these layers upon layers that have to work together, and if there's any one of those that's aberrant, it's to fix it works. And number 6, which is yours. Whatever number you have. You have 7?
We have 6.
6, okay. Alright. So we're back to Fernando. How's this going to affect him?
Oh, well, we said that in a very practical way. Probably you could cry,
Sure.
or you could experience substantial developmental disabilities as a result of prolonged famine. I mean, he's only 2, so this could have like a really lasting effect. But I think just survival is probably his main issue at this point.
So this is a humanitarian concern at this point.
Right. I mean, he's hitting one midday. He's 2 years old. Like, probably really malnourished. Certainly undernourished. So, which might make him more susceptible to diseases, and then any.
Because it's always the young and the old that are at most risk.
Exactly.
What about Elena? You know,
It's just personal.
it's I'm sure there's no formula going around. You know, is mom able to even breastfeed? Does she have enough? No. You know, so they're on the edge. They're barely able to. So anything else you can think about Fernando? What's going to happen to him? He's lost his dad, kind of. His dad had to go away. So he's got sort of a splinter family unit.
And he even risks losing them permanently if they die. Especially mothers will usually sacrifice them and their needs in order to provide for their children. Even if it means ultimately dying themselves, it needs to keep their needs alive.
On the plus side, though, they do have grandma. So they have some family support, you know.
We need grandma.
That's not what I meant.
Just get creative.
Fight for the grandma. But she's another resource in a way, you know. So if mom needs to go out and try to look for work, you know, they've still got grandma to watch the kids. She's got experience. Maybe she's gone through this before. Maybe they belong to church. They are a very tight-knit community. You know, this is possible too. But it's very bleak. Anything else y'all can think about? Okay, number 7 is going to be group 1. Your organization is in charge of making the aid more effective and efficient. How would you go about doing this?
So, mainly one of the ways that we have to bypass the government is monolithic. That was my first thought.
Okay.
But I think we have something to give it to private organizations that are there so they can distribute the funds.
Alright.
We also came up with rationing the money, so families get 3 meals per day, so when you give families that amount of money, it is better than buying 3 meals per day instead of giving them all the money at once.
So you're saying control what you're giving them.
Yeah,
So ration
per day.
down per day.
Per day.
Okay.
And I know most employees in the world the WFPs that most people they make their own branch there, like a physical branch there, that they don't have to trust any organization that only oversee themselves, they can oversee
That's a good idea. One of the groups last week said that because they wrote it on their website, they would negotiate and give money to influence the government to better distribute the aid.
Yeah, I was thinking that would be
It's like embargo, we got embargoes, we got all this kind of stuff. So
so
you
like
can,
time aid.
yeah, tied aid. Yeah, so you can tell them, look, you know, we're only going to help you if we see this happen. And by the way, we're going to come over here and we're going to administer this. And we're going to oversee it.
Or even better, like maybe we'll give you this, and this, but we'll give you extra
There you go.
on top of it.
Bigger carrot.
Yeah, give them that carrot.
Yeah, the organization I was talking about actually did that in meeting with the government, and the incentive is kind of sad but also funny. Was they would fund building a brand new soccer stadium for the country
I know people love that.
if they, you know, let them come in and partner with the
Really?
eventually, and it did.
That worked.
Built, and
See? Give them what they need. Or want.
which is kind of sad. That's what it took, but they
No,
have
whatever
nice conversations now.
That's a big deal though.
It is a
It's the
very big
national
deal.
pride, because that's like the one thing that's your students.
Yeah.
So yeah, you're back to culture.
Yeah.
You can't just go in and do what you think is going to work. It's got to fit with what they believe and what's important to them. Another one of the comments here was to topple the government and install a controllable dictator. The American way, they vote.
Yeah. I was gonna say, oh, this works decently well.
I mean, yeah.
DRC.
There are economic sanctions, the other American way. Okay, so we now want to talk a little bit about famine and what it actually is or what it isn't. Is it really not enough food? Is it? In this case, we know it's not enough food. But there could be enough food if countries were allowed to help, if the government wasn't controlling it and stealing it, and it being sold on the black market for exorbitant prices. So, anybody familiar with Amory Toussaint, Indian economist, philosopher extraordinaire? Okay, so he has written books about development, all that famine and all that stuff. So he was a child in the Bangladeshi famine of 1943, and he has examined that extensively and scientifically, and believes, it's his opinion, that there really was not truly a famine, that the numbers show there was more food that year than there was the previous year, but it was because of wage fluctuations, inflation and things, to where people couldn't afford to buy the food that was available. And there have been scenarios, you know, in history after that, years after, decades later, that the same kind of thing has happened. So it's usually not about people not having enough food, it's that there's not enough food that is available to them. Again, it's about entitlement. Are you one of that elite group that is able to access the food? I mean, you know, there could be a La Madeline right next door to me, but if I don't have any money to go over there and buy food, it's not, you know, I might starve to death. That's the only place to eat. I can't afford it there. So it's kind of that idea. We want to listen to some YouTube videos, and we will hear from a couple of these people. Okay, just a minute. I'll copy this over. Okay, this is Dambisa Moyo. She is a scholar who from Africa, and she.
Zimbabwe's latest appalling chapter. It's a tragedy made even greater by the fact that this country once had one of Africa's better healthcare systems. No doubt many of you watching tonight would like to assist the people seen in our story, but what to do? Foreign aid has long been the world's way of responding to Africa's woes. But what if the aid is actually making things worse? Here's Europe correspondent Philip Williams with an interesting new take on a very old problem.
You've got to get on the phone and take the money out of your pocket.
Okay.
Don't go to the
Very
post
80s,
office.
I know.
Please stay in and give us the money. There are people dying now, so give me the money.
Appalled by the seeming indifference of the developed world, Bob Geldof and a group of celebrities got together to raise money for Africa.
Oh, take down, 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 shoot it all down.
The result, of course, was the global broadcast phenomenon called Live Aid. The concerts raised billions of dollars from ordinary people around the world and marked the beginning of a new era of celebrity saviours who've been
Love the
growing in
hair.
authority, number and influence ever since. Enter African economist and author Dambisa Moyo, billed as the anti-Bono and with a provocative book called Dead Aid, a stinging critique of the so-called glamour aid. Moyo argues aid is not a solution, it's the problem.
I don't agree with the message. Fundamentally, I don't think Africa needs more aid. I think it needs less aid. It needs governments to be made accountable to the domestic citizenry and not accountable to donors. Africans stand in the hot African sun to elect their leaders, and it's those leaders who are charged with the responsibility of delivering social services and being accountable to their people. There clearly was a vacuum that has allowed the celebrity culture to seep in, but it would seem to me that no society would appreciate their whole policy and the future of their children to be dependent on celebrities that actually don't live in these contexts.
In 2005, Live Aid had become Live 8, and the frontrunners are now Sir Bob Geldof and Bono were taking their message directly to world leaders. But for Dambisa Moyo, the rise and rise of glamour aid is only part of the problem. She's also railing against what she describes as the self-perpetuating aid industry.
Basically, aid has become an industry. There are just way too many vested interests, and by and large, the criticisms that my book has been receiving are coming from those quarters, people who actually have a vested interest to see the continual cycle of Africa in despair so that they can justify their existence.
What sort of people are you talking about?
I'm talking about academics, I'm talking about people from the NGO community,
pretty harsh.
I'm talking about people who are policymakers and politicians
Could be
who
true.
know that it doesn't work. The evidence has shown it doesn't work. In 1970, 10% of Africans lived in poverty. It's now more like 70%, in many countries as high as 85% of Africans are living in poverty at a time when the aid model has become so dominant.
What's the solution?
In the book, I actually prescribe that they should, with immediate effect, or in the very near foreseeable future, implement a 5-year plan where they systematically reduce aid to these countries. I would say that things like the capital markets are an easy way for countries to start to fund themselves. So, in the worst case scenario, governments in Africa should focus on getting ratings. They should be focusing on learning how to pitch to international investors so that when the markets do come back, which they invariably will, they'll be ready to raise money in the capital markets. But on the other hand, right now there are non-traditional markets such as China and the Middle East where money does exist, and African governments should be talking to these places about issuing bonds and raising capital that way.
As we've just seen in Zimbabwe, there is a desperate need for humanitarian aid. In response to the new power-sharing deal there, Australia's just committed $10 million to fight cholera and encourage medical professionals to come back and help. Beyond the humanitarian question, though, Dambisa Moyo claims the enduring problem is the scale of government-to-government aid, the large systemic cash transfers from rich countries to Africa. Huge amounts of money squandered by the likes of Mugabe.
In the book, I talk about the fact that the Zimbabwean government received from the United Kingdom and the United States around $300 million as late as 2006. And I think that's worrying. That's a big concern. The fact that Mugabe can and does come to Europe and the United States. I was just in New York last September, and he was attending the UN meetings. And the fact that the UK and the United States maintain diplomatic ties with Zimbabwe leaves the African on the ground wondering what options they have to bring their governments to accountability.
I suspect many people watching this program would say the problem's not aid, it's corrupt leaders.
I don't think you can delink the two in the African context. I think an aid model makes good leaders bad and makes bad leaders worse. It's free money. There are no strings attached. Even in the times when multilateral institutions and donors have talked about conditionalities, those conditionalities are weak. They are not applied, again, because the aid industry, it thrives and feeds on Africans borrowing money, and so the cycle keeps going on.
Does it make you angry when you look at the amount of money that's been spent in Africa over the past 20, 30 years?
Well, I think it's absurd. We're in 1 year of a problem in the capitalist system, and we are so critical of capitalism. 60 years of an aid-dependent model, and we hear only calls for more aid. That, to me, is is intellectual dishonesty, particularly from the quarters of people who I know for a fact have been big proponents of capitalism in other regions of the world, but when it comes to Africa, they're big supporters of aid. I think
Why? Is there a blind spot there? Or why
Well,
particularly Africa?
to be quite honest, I think it's built in pity. I think the whole aid model emanates from a pity for Africa, a sense that Africa cannot do it, cannot achieve growth. And sadly, because there are incentives, which, as you know, the world has shown, people, governments, companies respond to incentives. There are incentives for African governments to take aid. We basically ended up in a situation where it doesn't work, and we're happy to just keep it going.
And you're absolutely confident that removing that aid is not going to leave at least some people without food, without medicine?
I think the ones that will be affected most will probably be the African elite as opposed to the broader population.
What will they lose?
I think they would lose possibly their bank accounts in Geneva at the worst case scenario. But I mean, I think beyond that, I think that they would also lose the ability to have leisure time, and they'd be required to actually go out and start to work hard to find money to support their social programs in Africa.
What would you say though to the well-meaning Australian who donates to the charity, who urges the Australian government, for example, to lift its game with aid? What would you say to those people?
I would say it's very important to understand what that type of aid can and cannot do. It can provide a band-aid solution. So we've talked about humanitarian aid as one example of that, but it cannot deliver long-term growth that would ensure Africa to stand on its own 2 feet and become an equal partner on the global stage. So to give you an example, yes, you might help fund a scholarship for a girl to go to school, but when she's done with her education, the fact that aid has been so pernicious and so damaging to an economy means that the economy has not grown, that girl that you've helped sponsor will not find a job in her economy.
If you cut off aid within 5 years, surely that's going to leave millions of people without the support they are now dependent on. Food aid, medical aid that really keeps people alive.
I don't believe that's the case. Most Africans do not see any of the aid that you're alluding to. It's again, their best case scenario in some projects is 20 cents on the dollar that actually makes it to an African, and that's best case. Effectively, if we continue down this path, we will have many more Africans living in poverty in few years to come, and that is really the problem, that there are no jobs coming out of an aid model.
And with the market reforms that you would advocate in that system, under that system, if it's widely adopted, what vision do you have of Africa?
The vision I have is basically one that looks like what's happening in the rest of the world when they've adopted those models. Growth rates that could get up to double digits, as we've seen in China and India and so on, and also much more participation by the broader African society, not only in terms of economic participation and entrepreneurship, but also in terms of political participation and ensuring that their governments are held accountable to deliver those services.
Let's hope you're right. Thank you very much for talking to us.
Thank you very much, and I am right.
And Miss Moya's book is called...
I have to play it all the way to the end.
And wouldn't it be interesting to be a fly on the wall when she run against the same roof as Popyolog and Bono?
And I am right. Okay, so what do you think? What do you think about her?
She makes some really cogent points.
What?
She makes some really good points.
I agree. I know. And that bleeding heart liberal inside of me just kind of cringes sometimes, but she makes really good points.
I mean, I'm a bleeding heart liberal as well, but I don't think my liberal politics in this country preclude me agreeing with the fact that she's addressing very clear problems with the model we have. She said it's based on a paternalistic opinion of what we think these people are capable of, and that's like the issue, where it's like we want it to be about like, oh, we feel good and they're so poor, but it's pity and we're not doing anything to facilitate any real improvement. We're just perpetuating some sort of cycle of, you know, corruption or what have you.
Whatever. So, you know what it makes me think of? I mean, consciously or otherwise, are we wanting, a country, wanting them to be in this position for some reason, like you say, paternalistic, views, whatever it is. I mean, are we wanting to keep this group of people down for a reason? You don't think so?
I don't think you personally have any reason why we would to do that to them.
I think we struggle to conceptualize that there are countries in Africa, and there are countries in Africa that are doing a good job at, having democratic elections, educating their population, and working hard towards creating sustainable models, economic models that look forward and also that keep people employed. Like there are countries that do that.
When she's talking about the capital market, and the bonds and all of that, I mean, that just makes sense to me.
And that's
smart.
happening.
Yes, that's what she's saying. This is old. This is not a brand new.
Yeah, there was something that came out, and I wish I could remember the source recently about, it was like a comparison of aid given between China and the United States on the continent of Africa. And one thing they highlighted is that most of the aid given by China is not free aid, it's loans. And it's loans for various projects and infrastructure and what have you, but it's not like you pay it back with interest, it's a loan, so you have, free things are worth what you pay for them, right?
And I know I have more life experience than all of you, but you might have run into this. I mean, just on a personal level, I have family members who were given to their entire lives, like by my parents, and in their 50s, they still don't have a job, they still have never bought a car, they don't maintain their home, they don't care about anything that they have because it was free. Trash it, don't have to keep it up, I don't have to go to work, somebody's going to bail me out. Whether it's my sister, or it's my grandmother, somebody, or the government, it could be the government, someone is going to continue to take care of me. For me, I struggle with, is this something that's innately part of them, that it, has always been there, or is it just, were they trained to be this way, or is it a combination of factors? But it really, I think, parallels a lot of what she's talking about. What do we think about when you say Africa? We see those pictures, right? Somebody's laying, on a cot. There's flies. It's these horrid conditions. There are people in perhaps traditional costumes who, in our minds, we might think, oh, well, they're, not civilized. They're not wearing clothes like we wear. They don't drive cars like we drive. But there are parts of Africa that do look like the United States. There are parts of Galveston that look like Africa, right? Remember Dr. Dash showing those pictures? Is this a development? This is Galveston right down the street. Hello. Yeah, there are places in our own country that we could just, switch the images. So a lot of it, I think, does have to do with our preconceived notion of what we expect from this group of people. And let's just give them some money and then we won't worry about it. It'll make us feel good. They're going to be fine. But when you talk about free money, and that makes up 80% of your government budget, there's something wrong with that picture. Because why not? Somebody's going to be throwing money at me. I'm going to take it. I don't need to change anything. I'll just build a new palace and, buy a new boat, new cars, all this stuff. I don't need to give that to those people. I mean, who's going to stop me? So you kind of get some of her ideas. So now let's look at the other side for just a moment. And he's not near as, fascinating, intriguing. I'm right. No, he doesn't say that. Is that going to be the right one?
Welcome back. Well, if the wheels did fall off the world's financial system, then Jeffrey Sachs might say, well, at least the developed countries have
So this is Jeff
wheels
Sachs.
to begin with.
He's pro-aid.
Poorest nations have neither the system nor the wheels. But Sachs is no pessimist. He's used to fighting. For years, he's been demanding that the developed countries pool their resources to end world poverty within a decade. In recent years, Sachs has been involved in an often fierce battle of ideas with critics of foreign aid, especially fellow economist William Easterly and neoconservative think tanks, who insist most such help is wasted and often does more harm than good. This disagreement over aid is one of the central global debates of our time. In his latest book, Commonwealth, Sachs is again back on the attack. Citing past aid successes, he insists a true global effort to wipe out extreme poverty can work. Most of the development tools are already in place, just waiting for action. In New York, Jeffrey Sachs recently hosted a special State of the Planet conference at his Earth Institute at Columbia University. That's where we had this conversation. Jeffrey Sachs, welcome to Our World. Thank you for joining us. Nice to talk to you.
Thank you. Delighted to be with you.
In your book, Commonwealth, you address head-on this strange welling up of a lot of criticism and cynicism about the effectiveness of international aid. You take it on from the very start. It's suggested it's not only completely wrong in many areas, but very harmful.
Well, aid, we know, works when it's done well and directed to the right things. If you are practical about aid, specific bed nets for fighting malaria, medicines to keep people alive with AIDS, water
See, now I go,
to help people that have water stress, help for agriculture to grow more food. These practical things have been shown time and again to have fantastic results, and small amounts of money have huge effects. The naysayers just generalize. Of course, if we put money down the drain in Iraq, it's going to show up as wasted aid, but that was knowingly wasted from the start. How could anybody think that that was going to work? But if we fight malaria and measles and AIDS and hunger, there are such proven, known, specific, trackable, monitorable, auditable interventions that have been shown time and again to have huge results. You can't really argue with that. And then people say we wasted so much money. Do you know that we've now spent more on the Iraq War than all the world has ever given to all of Africa in all time in aid in all of history? In fact, in 1 year, we spent more on the Pentagon, $700 billion, than the whole world's history of aid to Africa in the last half century. Not just U.S. aid, the whole world's aid to all of Africa. So we do very little. Often we do it badly, let's be clear, because if you hand over cash, that's not going to work. If you give it in a war zone for poor ideas of foreign policy, it's not going to work. But if you focus on things that aid can do in agriculture, in schooling, in education, of all sorts, adult education, literacy, and basic infrastructure, these things have been shown time and again to be enormously important for poor people, and not as handouts, but to help them get out of the poverty trap.
And we can prove that with actual statistics, decline of infant mortality, for instance. So,
well, take one simple example, so powerful. In Africa, where they say it can't be done, so much corruption and so forth, UNICEF and the government of Norway and others teamed up to take on measles. Measles deaths are down by 91% since the year 2000. And not in one pilot project, not in, quote, well-governed countries, across sub-Saharan Africa. Millions of bed nets are being distributed when the International Red Cross and UNICEF have the funding to do it. They're limited not by their capacity to save lives, but by the funds that come to them. In Niger, one of the poorest and toughest places in the world, in 1 week, 2 million bed nets were distributed, leading to a tremendous drop of malaria transmission. And if this can be done in 1 week, and in a couple of days, millions of nets distributed in Kenya, we could actually get malaria under control, essentially bring the deaths down almost to zero, at a cost, let me put it this way, we need 300 million bed nets. They cost $5 each, 1.5 billion. They last 5 years. That 1.5 billion is less than the U.S. spends in 1 day on the Pentagon.
These figures, these claims can be so easily exploded if you look at it. Is there an agenda behind this pessimism that's rolled out in the last decade?
There's an ideology behind it. Some people in the United States think if you're poor, it's your fault. or they don't want to help, or the free market will solve everything. These are very ideological points. This is not evidence-based. And it's so easy to wave the red cape and get everybody mad. You say, do you know $500 billion has been given to Africa, and where's it gone? And they don't do the most basic arithmetic. For instance, that's over 60 years for a continent that has now 800 million people. So you divide and you find out, well, that's a few dollars per person. It's about $14 per person on average over this period for all the problems that Africa has. And as I noted, less than 1 year's Pentagon spending.
You suggest that the challenges now are so glaring and so urgent in an overcrowded world that there's no way around the world finally facing up to it. But it has to do it in a very coordinated way using a big idea approach that we have today, that is missing today.
We have drawn lines, at least figuratively, in the sand, and we call them national borders. We say that's what we care about. But people cross those borders, refugees, migrants, legal and illegal, pathogens, in other words, disease agents, cross those borders. Whether we like it or not, one person arriving can start an epidemic in another country. And we know how new emerging diseases like AIDS or SARS or other diseases can spread so fast. Climate change and the greenhouse gases, they don't stop at the border. They're circulating in the atmosphere. The way that food is grown in the rest of the world can affect us, where antibiotics used to grow that food, creating a worldwide resistance to disease, to worldwide pest resistance to those antibiotics, I should say. So many things cross our borders without any restraint that we have to understand. If we don't take these issues on together, we can't solve any of them.
You point out as well that there are many more players involved now that can really turn a lot more edge here.
Okay. So, what do you think? What do you think about Mr. Sachs, Dr. Sachs?
I think he has a good point in that we all just kind of have to work together in this, and that it's not one extreme or the other. You know, there's pros and cons to both sides.
Yeah.
And even this article that I was reading that was actually talking about the proposed budget being cut by a third for foreign aid for 2018. The statistics that they bring in for a specific program in South Africa, just cutting that program's budget, it's for HIV prevention and treatment, which was a huge, thing that was funded by the U.S. government that had huge implications in decreasing the prevalence of HIV. And just cutting that budget for that specific program by 13% alone, it's predicted statistically to increase the deaths by 22%. And so, from HIV.
Right.
And so, I really, I guess, kind of, I like what Hillary Samoya. I really like her points because I think that people tend to get caught up in the feel-good vision of aid, and the great things. But I also don't think that we should completely disregard that. I think that there are benefits of it. It's kind of like school. Like, at least in my case, I got some of my school paid for by scholarships, but my dad also, the rest was up to me. My parents did not say, oh, we'll pay for your school. I'm not saying that that's wrong for anybody whose parents did help them out. But I, when people hear that, they're like, oh, well, don't you resent your parents? Because my parents are not, they're not grandiosely well off, but they're also not unable to afford helping me out. But that was more so my dad teaching me, like, you need to be able to make your own financial investments. One of those being your education and, making your decisions.
Warren Buffett model. Have you ever seen his take on his children and grandchildren? Oh, wow. That man doesn't give them a dime. And I'm thinking that's pretty severe. But
And it wasn't that he didn't do it out of,
no, it was the principle.
it was
He was
out of
trying to
love.
teach.
Yeah, exactly. But again, I appreciated the scholarships immensely. It just, I don't think it made me want to say, oh, well, part of my school's paid for it, so I don't really necessarily need to invest my time or,
And it needs more. I mean, as a student, I remember thinking, oh, this friend of mine, this is her second degree, and her parents are paying for it, and so she just kind of halfway did everything. Whereas I was an older student, this was extremely this is what I wanted to do. I knew what I wanted to do. I was focused and motivated, and I killed myself doing it, and I paid for it, and I'm still paying for it. So, yeah, it's come out of Social Security or something, but no, but it's worthwhile. It's meaningful to you. So that's maybe a good segue into kind of what they're discussing. And as healthcare professionals, just bring it back to that because you got very passionate about the HIV thing. Pulling that back is going to cause more deaths related to HIV things. So when we have famine in Fernando, Elena, and their community dying because of a famine, we have to consider that they are more susceptible to disease, and especially infectious diseases. It's not going to be chronic diabetes. Chronic disease like diabetes and hypertension, they're not going to live long enough. They don't have to worry about that. It's the day-to-day emergencies, like they're talking about malaria. And if they brought these nets and they attacked the measles, so these were specific projects that didn't go to the government,
right?
Somehow, they didn't get a hold of the nets and then charge 10 times the price. They gave them to the people, right? And so they were able to benefit. So there has to be some way to do better without just throwing the money at people. I think there has to be a middle road somehow with both. I mean, I really agree with her capital market idea, but that's a different thing. It's very different from what we're doing. I mean, we're not economists here or financial planners.
We're not going to take over a
No.
I don't feel like his ideas and hers are mutually exclusive. I feel like they can both coexist, certainly, because he is
and I
talking.
think they need to coexist.
Absolutely.
And so
she's talking about,
she's talking about development aid.
Systemic development aid that has little oversight or is, that has also all of the intrinsic problems that we talked about previously. He's talking about very specific pointed projects that have good track records and quantifiable improvements. And so I think,
to improve a person's quality of life.
And that are measurable.
Yes, measurable. Okay. So, to kind of wrap up, this is Amartya Sen's comment that the challenge is to respond to the plight of the hopelessly impoverished without neglecting to insist that help come in useful and productive forms. That's exactly what you all have been saying tonight, and I think you've really gotten at the heart of it. So, to wrap up, thank you. It was a great conversation tonight. For next time, you'll want to look at the literature like you did this time, looking at human rights in your profession, because Ms. Marcy Contreras from the PA department will be here to deliver that session, and you can talk a little bit about that point and why the human rights matter to you as you do your international rotation and maybe your future career in another country. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful evening. I appreciate that. Yeah.
So I guess it's I still had to take out lunch. And thankfully I'm so close. Isn't it so nice to be so close? I really miss it. So exciting. Did you do private?
That's good.
Don't have Hey, dude, door to door recycling. I need to take my recycling over to the second.
No, that's one call.
Oh.
They brought me like a
That was close.
like an apple.
Don't do that, huh? I'm gonna let you do that before I break something that doesn't belong to me.